Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, hoping that the gimbal is there for me on this particular journey today. Yesterday, it overheated, and I was just doing a last minute Facebook Live just because it was such a beautiful day. But I think the problem is that I was a little misbalanced, and therefore it just made the system too hot because then it did work a little later. So I give it a go, but I think it's working. So, good morning, and hi, Diane. Good morning and hello from New Zealand. When I say good morning, it is about 9:30 in the morning here. I'm going to keep this journey down specifically to about 25 minutes because my friend Elizabeth, I believe, is in Bolivia starting in a half hour. So, good morning to you, friend. Hi there. Hi, Karen. Lovely to have you. So, what I wanted to do is welcome everyone to what is known as the Wairarapa. Hey, good. Hi. Hi, nice to see you, Michelle. Um, so I'm in the Wairarapa here. I'm in the town, this town, I almost want to call it a village of Martinborough. Now, where this is, to put it in some perspective, well, in every perspective, imagine the North Island of New Zealand. Feel free, hi, and feel free to have a look at the map. So Wellington, of course, is the capital of New Zealand. It's not truly the very bottom, but it really is the very south end of the North Island in beautiful Wellington Bay. You will see I did a little video yesterday mostly to check that my gimbal was working, but then uh, as well because it's such a spectacular day. Look at the blue sky up behind me. Now there are a few clouds this morning, but it is just gorgeous. But so we drove for about an hour, a quarter, an hour and 20 minutes from Wellington up the Hutt Valley. So really up Lower Hutt, Upper Hutt, which is the Hutt River, which is very, very low right now. They're on water restrictions here. It's dry. And then up and over a very windy road. Thank you, Anne. I appreciate that. Thank you for your contributions, everyone. Up and over a beautiful mountain road that really I would have loved. Hi, John. I would have loved to be able to live stream it. Um, and then we came down into this very flat area. I'm not high at all. I think I don't know, 175 meters or something, 200 feet. Like it's not high at all, but out in the distance, very little else is built. So the road I was on is the one that goes up the east coast of New Zealand, all the way up to Hastings. Hi, Fran. Um, and so you go to Greytown, and the biggest city in the whole region is maybe 30,000 people. But the Wairarapa is an old Maori term and it means glistening water. So that's and there is a big lake here, but we're in this little bowl and it's a microclimate. Why the microclimate is so significant is this is one of the big wine producing regions now. Hey, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, M. Um, as one of the wine producing regions, famous for its Pinot Noirs, but also, of course, those Sauvignon Blancs, which New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs are the ones that I always buy at home. It's just lovely. Now, of course, New Zealand, in a colonial sense, if you join me up in Auckland, really goes back to 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi, which is up north of Auckland. Settlement starts to happen down here around that period as well. Now, there is a Maori population still, but many were displaced, as you can imagine. And it was John Martin who came and established himself. Kia ora. Hey, Ali, hi there. Way up north. Yes, we're literally all my European friends. I think I'm 11 hours from the UK and 12 hours exactly. I was doing emails. We're setting up this tour for Italy in October, and it's either early in the morning or late at night my time that I speak to them over there. But John Martin comes here and establishes this place, hence Martinborough, but also this monument and this central square that I'm standing in here is actually laid out however one feels about such things, in the Union flag. So it's laid out as a Union flag. Some people say the Union Jack, that's a maritime term, but that's how this is laid out in the square. So it is about as colonial as you can get. So, and I actually didn't, I had one glass of rosé yesterday. I'm obviously here staying with family, and my family are wonderful and very, very moderate. So we have one glass of wine or beer. But look at this, in memory of local troopers who died for the Empire during the Boer War. Now, New Zealand becomes a dominion within the British Empire in 1907. Very importantly, though, in 1893, this country granted full suffrage to all citizens, which means, and by some measures, this is the oldest or the first place in the world where women achieved full suffrage, which is a pretty neat thing to say about New Zealand. But there is some really nice architecture around the square here that's fun to share. By the way, Um, New Zealanders are very friendly, but quite an introverted culture. But they do look at me a little funny walking along with the gimbal and the camera. So I really am making a point of not pointing it towards anyone. But this is sparsely populated. There's about 2,000 people here in Martinborough, but lots of people who have holiday homes. Um, it is. So that's a good point. It looks pristine. It's very clean, but again, sparsely populated. Very agricultural around here. Loads of cattle, and of course, it's New Zealand, so loads of sheep. There's a truck. And that's oh, there's the fire station. Makes sense because a lot was built with wood around here. So there's an 1894 building. So, like I say, I mean, as a colonial entity, New Zealand is quite a lot younger. This whole valley, though, you climb in to a lot of military history here, and I'm only so much of a fan of that. But in 1914, New Zealand had a population of 1.1 million, and of course, a huge contribution to World War One, as was the case with Australia and Canada, in those colonial sense, for better and for worse. And the soldiers would train up here and then actually walk over the hills. And you'll see the tall mountains way in the distance. Hopefully, you can see them out to Wellington, where they would get on ships and sail off to Europe. Of course, the huge event in World War One for the Australian and New Zealand troops was the Battle of Gallipoli, which is in Turkey, of course. And I went and visited there a couple of years ago. Finally, for all the time I've spent in Turkey, and I mean, it was a tragic loss, and the New Zealanders for a very small population. Had many deaths, not as many as the Australians had, and that was actually a plan that was set up. Um, yes, I'll come back to that, Karen. Was set up by Winston Churchill, believe it or not. That was the idea, was to control the Bosphorus. But there's lovely, yeah. So just coming back to that interesting point that we're making. So 1893 was full suffrage. Now remember, the first uh, two women elected anywhere in the British Empire were in Alberta, um, and but full suffrage doesn't come till 1919 in Canada. Of course, as a political jurisdiction in the West, you could say Wyoming was actually the first. Although, when you really climb into the history of suffrage, there were different places around the world where women in different senses had suffrage, and that's important. In fact, we had coffee last week, well, on the day of my aunt's birthday, and had some friends who, well, one of them was Swiss, and the other was a Kiwi, but lived in Switzerland for years. And of course, it wasn't St. Gallen, it was another town where women did not get full suffrage till 1989 there, and actually women voted against it. Amazing. There's the old Martinborough Hotel. It has a very, so there's some of that older colonial architecture that you get in these areas. The tin roofs or the corrugated iron roofs that were endemic to here and many parts of Australia. And you can also see there's another hotel. We'll go down the Petit Hotel, and it has that false front on it. So then, World War II, this area was used as a prisoner of war camp as well for the Japanese. And the Japanese actually rose up and tried to escape, and that led to a mass shooting. So, quite a big deal. But here are people from this region who died in World War One, a so-called Great War, and there was nothing great about it whatsoever. Um, and that's the same thing, erected 1921. But it would be interesting. I don't obviously have a helicopter, but if you look down over here, this central square is laid out like the Union flag. Yesterday, when I was in Eastbourne, which is a really gorgeous community right on Wellington Bay, there's actually a sign for Eastbourne in England, which is 18,800 kilometers away. Isn't that amazing? It's a very simple layout. Lots of lovely little coffee shops. There's a real culinary scene in New Zealand, which is fun because so much of the food is locally grown and developed. I'm going to see when I fly home if hopefully up in Auckland I can buy some New Zealand cheese because it's just delicious. Now you can never ever bring food into this country, of course, because they're protecting their biological environment. And think about it. I mean, these two or three islands were isolated for millions of years, and mostly settled by by birds, of course, and the largest birds to ever roam on planet Earth had lived here, and they were hunted by the Maori. The Maori arrived probably in the 8th century and may well have come from Rapa Nui or Easter Island. Pretty amazing. Yeah, I just actually came across the street. There's an Asian called Crouching Tiger. I bet the food's good in there. Um, Hi, happy morning to you. Thank you. So there's the Petit Hotel. Now that any kind of a frontier town will have those false facades on them historically. It's always so interesting if you join me up in Dawson City. Of course, they've preserved that at the Yukon. But do have a look at the map where I am. So it's southeast North Island, New Zealand. Um, Here's the village of over here. So olive oil, which they raise here in New Zealand. You can really, if you want to eat healthily in New Zealand, it's very easy to do so. Um, and it's oh, and there's bike hire. I don't know. Oh, you have to wear a helmet, by the way, if you ride a bike in New Zealand. So I could rent a bike there. I was sort of hoping for more of a road bike because the roads are not busy and there's some great hills to climb. If I were to come down and live in New Zealand, of course I have my huge fat bike at home, but I would invest absolutely in a very, very good road bike. See, there's that kind of tin awning that's so endemic to these permanent awnings that they have over the buildings, very endemic to the architecture here, and certainly parts of Australia and Tasmania looks very much that as well. And as you can see, they're moving from kind of a generator, but it's very agricultural here. Now, if the wind blows a little more, you can actually see the New Zealand flag in the distance. I'm seeing a lot of Maori flags around as well throughout the country, which is nice to see. I'm not seeing any of them here, but lots of these lovely little homes. Also, of course, another thing that New Zealand has embraced for years and years and years is golf. And of course, we can golf year round. So there's a nice big golf course. And we might go out tonight. Apparently, after hours, you can go and just leave some money in a box and play a few holes. So I really like that idea. So I'll get a chance to swing a club. But here's the art of living well. Mint at Martinborough. And these little places, what they've done in New Zealand so much as a lifestyle thing in these areas, again, small populations, but they really are into very interesting architecture in this part of the world, and that is significant. And of course, building is relatively easy insofar as you don't need basements or anything for that kind of infrastructure. Housing costs are massive. We were just talking the other day about the fact that my son is at school up in Edmonton. If he decides to stay there next year, we'll do our best to buy an apartment for him, and that we can afford that. I mean, anywhere around. I mean, the costs for housing and everything in New Zealand are incredibly high. So people have so much of their money tied up in houses, which has to affect disposable income. It just simply has to affect disposable income because wages are not particularly high against the cost of housing, but they do very interesting things architecturally. And we're staying with that lovely home right there. A little bit of a Victorian bay window on it. And of course, wood infrastructure. They use all sorts of different materials. And New Zealand, for a small country, actually exports a lot of furnishings. And yeah, just things that I didn't even know about, but they have their own market for hood fans and for small size, like drawer dishwashers. And of course, this very interesting climate. This area is considered warmer than Wellington. Well, Wellington famously can be cold and windy year round. This place apparently can get quite windy, but it's in a little bit of a bowl. And because of this bowl, in fact, if I look down the street here, you'll able to see the mountains in the distance a little more clearly out there. So if you get up and over those hills, which is just beautiful, and then you descend down and you're into the greater Wellington area. I know Wellington's 550,000 people, but here in Martinborough, the official population is just around 2,000. We're in Strasbourg Street, and there's Ohio and Kansas Street. Don't know what the connections are, but you'll see what we've just done as we come up around the corner. There's a V in the road here, and this all leads back up to the central square where we started, which is the layout like the Union flag. So that colonial entity, of course, played a big, big role historically in this country. In fact, I remember old friends of my dad's who have passed now, but they lived here for years and years, but also worked in England, but they considered themselves British overseas citizens. Now, that obviously is not the case for a lot of modern New Zealanders, but it is, just an interesting reality that played a big role here. And again, in those war efforts, the Boer War, it's interesting to see that monument in the middle of the square to the Boer War, because that was Canada's first overseas engagement. I expect it was Australia's too, the true colonial wars. Um, and they don't want you parking over here, but they do have bikes. Interesting to see the containers there, because up in Auckland, the bike stands are all this kind of container. So it would be fun to go out, and we've been making such nice food at home. We actually had salmon for dinner last night, which would have been farmed because it is farmed here in New Zealand, but it was lovely and fresh. And of course, New Zealand has a huge producer of dairy products, and that is exactly why my grandfather emigrated here. He worked for the New Zealand Dairy Board way back when, as he was a gentleman who worked in milk pasteurization in Ireland. So that's fun. I think that butcher's loft looks really yummy over there. And then the morning coffee shops. But like I say, I'm just being careful to keep a distance. People sort of look at me in a funny way with the camera. Um, but duck legs, a pig is selling duck legs over there for $25 each. I love eating duck, but that is an interesting thing to me. A lady is backing up, so I'm just going to get out across the square here, safe and sound. So now I'm looking out towards the east and the south. And if you went down there, you get to a very wild coastline. And New Zealand's, well, the south part of the North Island, so famously windy. I was mentioning the other day about the history of the shipwrecks and everything in this part of the world. And you can imagine how far you'd have to travel. So I'm talking, my uncle left New Zealand for the first time when he was 23 and left from the harbor in Wellington. And he took, and this is a fabulous story, took a ship for 2 weeks and arrived into Acapulco. And then he went up to Mexico City and watched the 1968 Olympics. Can you imagine how cool that is? Um, and then that's interesting. I'm in a crosswalk, and they did not even try and stop for me, whereas another car did. Pedestrians don't automatically get the right of way. And look at all this fun stuff. So you've got town hall down this way with the rugby grounds, and of course, this is a country that is fanatical about rugby. Very, very small. It's not a small population as it used to be, but the winningest team in the history of rugby, the All Blacks. So let's take a little stroll down here. It is it is friendly and safe and calm. If you're someone who likes a lot of excitement, you'd find this very quiet. Now, because it is agricultural, yesterday I was wandering around town, right, kind of about 5:30, the end of the workday, and really, I mean, some of the images you have, you have the working people, just with the wellies they call them, the rubber boots, and a real sunburned look, which of course they're being so much more careful about. So the coastline, great question, Karen. I was just asking, is it rocky? So there are sandy beaches all around New Zealand. So you do find them, usually in the bays and the coves, of course. Yesterday I was on a sandy bay, but the coastline that's down in the distance over here, I would love to go find that coastline. There are real little tracks to get out there. I think it would be gorgeous in this kind of weather, but also it must just be spectacular to see it when they're having some of those massive storms, those southerlies that blow up in the wintertime. And so I would expect, well, I was looking at maps quite closely, and some of it would be really wild and kind of cliff faces. And then other parts of it, as soon as you get in something sheltered, then you get the sand. I mean, at the end of the day, this is, we're subtropical. Really, Auckland is very kind of in the subtropics. There's no tropics in New Zealand, right? The very top of New Zealand, 90 Mile Beach, is kind of equivalent to Sydney in Australia. So if you think of much hotter places like Brisbane and everything, that's a lot further north. And the South Island is pretty much right across from Tasmania, puts it in some perspective. Um, and Oh, and you're wondering, yeah, why Wellington is so windy. Yeah, say the windiest capital in the world. I mean, is famously the windiest sort of city in the world. It's really because you have the space between the North Island and the South Island, and the South Island is offset. So the North Island is not a very easy shape to mimic. The South Island is long and thin. I remember Aotearoa, which is the Maori name for New Zealand, is the land of the long white cloud. But so the South Island has Alps in it, and there's one down by Queenstown. There's one mountain range which goes east-west rather than north-south, which is quite rare, a different kind of thrust fault formation. But the North Island is distinctly volcanic. And when I say distinctly volcanic, I mean they have earthquakes all the time. As just a side note, have you been following the news about Santorini in Greece? Thousands of earthquakes in there. The people are leaving the island en masse. There's interesting thing there. But yeah, they have earthquakes here all the time. And I read around here in Martinborough in 55, they had one of the biggest recorded earthquakes on the North Island, like an 8 or something. So, and they're all set up for it. The architecture allows for it. But there are big volcanoes, and you do notice along the coast volcanic rock. Yeah, it's you get the volcanic rock. So I mean, it's a fascinating country in a sense. I mean, it was so isolated. And it feels from the air, it feels very South Pacific. And when you're flying into Auckland, you see all the waves crashing. And my flight from Auckland down here. Now, in the past, I've driven the whole thing. But of course, it's quite a short visit. I mean, I'm going home on Sunday, so I mean, it really is a short visit. Today is Thursday here. For many of you, it'll be Wednesday. So we're going to stay here all day today and all day tomorrow and drive back to the city probably in the evening and bonjour. And then hang out Saturday, and then Sunday I fly Wellington, Auckland, Vancouver, 14 and a half, 15 hours, and then Vancouver, Calgary. And I will land in Calgary about an hour and a half after I've left Wellington. Now, when I came the other way, I lost 2 days coming down. So, that's kind of the nature of the beast. Now, let's have some little bit of fun here because you see how quickly I have wandered 3 blocks, I guess, and here we are in Vineyards. So I think it's a vine time for a glass of wine. I'm sure there's a poem in there somewhere. But all of these vineyards, and again, I always think of the Sauvignon Blancs, but apparently this area is most famous for its Pinot Noirs. Now, New Zealand reds are not as famous as New Zealand whites. New Zealand whites are among some of the best in the world, and they've got a real rosé culture now as well. There they are. Now, bird populations everywhere. The only negative, so we've seen some rabbits this morning. Rabbits were obviously introduced to New Zealand. Anything that's introduced here will do well because it's this perfect climate. Oh, what a gorgeous house. How's that for a Victorian colonial house in the distance? Yeah, so hello, you gorgeous little birds. The bird like, oh, these little ones here. Let's see if I can. There's a redhead. That'll be the male in the pair. Oh, there you go. Funny thing about birds is when you walk up to them, they often fly away. Um, yeah, so it does. I mean, it all feels very colonial. I know a lot of people from, say, the States and so forth might say, oh, you feel like you're going back um, 50 years when you come here. I don't agree with that because it's such a high level of education in New Zealand. Thanks, Diane. And you have a high level of education here and a really healthy outdoor lifestyle if you want it. Um, but, it is quite a slow pace. I mean, there's some really lively, fun things in Auckland, but just a few streets. And then Wellington has a bit of a pub culture, of course. I think what I'm going to try and do is wander down by that house. I am keeping the eye on the time here, everyone, just because, as I say, my friend Elizabeth has a tour. And unless I got the time wrong, I may have, but I believe she has a tour starting in about 8 minutes. And I think she's in Bolivia. So, some of my favorite places in the whole wide world. So I'd strongly encourage you to go over to her page and have a look at that, of course, and say hi. I'll try and stick my nose in as well. Now, there are water restrictions, and it is interesting. This must be from birds. So, just coming back to the ecology, there's a rat problem here in New Zealand. And then, of course, cats. You do not see a lot of cats around. I've always been a cat lover, but cats are really not good at all for wildlife like kiwi birds that cannot fly and cannot run particularly fast. You can imagine feral cats. It's Our tour is in 8 minutes. Thanks, Jeremy. I, I'm not turning the screen around because I had to put my glasses on to see what everyone was writing. But this is this is fun. But yeah, it's great that if Elizabeth, in fact, I don't know if someone can even pop up a link to her tour. I don't know if we can do that in the chat here, but it's nice to always see Elizabeth doing interesting things down in that part of the world. And in fact, so we're 41 South. Just coming back to these endemic species and so forth, they're doing their very best to reintroduce native wildlife throughout and to try and get rid of course, all these introduced species. Because the climate is so good here, things will just grow and they have to go after them. This is a good example, for example. Look at that architecture over there. Like, that is really modern. And you see it all through. I really enjoy architecture. And then you have this old, very, very Victorian sort of colonial look there. It is awfully beautiful, isn't it? So it's that's the kind of thing you find just everywhere throughout New Zealand. And yeah, and then now see people driving along. Fuel is expensive here because it's all imported. So that's a fairly big deal as well. The New Zealand dollar right now is one Canadian dollar is $1.23 New Zealand. So puts the New Zealand dollar at about 55 cents American, or probably 45 pence or something. UK. And so yeah, the euro is probably right around 2 to 1. And if you factor that in, it's not actually that expensive. It just feels expensive, the prices. So oh good if there's lots on Elizabeth's tour. Well, in light of that, ladies and gentlemen, I did want to do a nice little walk around. I do appreciate your support, of course, and I appreciate you sharing these. By the way, yesterday, I did, after I got the gimbal working again, which is just fine now, it must have just been misbalanced. I did a little 11-minute video where I was hiking up a V-Sporn, but it's some just wonderful views. That's a really easy one to share, and I appreciate if you share that one around everyone. So this is clearly their rugby grounds out here. This is also a fence I have no desire to touch because it has a very electric look on it. I don't know if that's true, but I would hate to be shocked. Haha. And here's the big sporting grounds. And thank you, Paula. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, you see those nets down there? I'm not sure if you know what that is. That is for practicing batting in cricket. There's cricket is a big, big sport down here as well. So you stand in there and you hit it. So cricket, if you're unfamiliar, imagine a baseball going on for 5 days and ending in a tie. Actually, I'm really glad I came out to the rug. This is more like a soccer pitch, but there's rugby grounds in the distance there. Look at these trees as well. Now they're all very light because they are actually a little thirsty. But you have a look at all these hills in the distance. Isn't that just gorgeous? And that becomes, I mean, just tiny, tiny little communities. But you just see how beautiful this all is. So, on that happy, happy note, ladies and gentlemen, um, yeah, well, the rats and all that came in on the ships, of course. Now, the Maori came over and I don't know. I expect they brought chickens. They certainly used to, and the Polynesians would travel with pigs. Um, but then they hunted the native birds. But then when the European ships came, of course, they always had rats on them. That's where the Highland Terriers come from. For example, they were ratters. They were kept on the ships to go hunt them, and I'm sure I'm sure rat mummies love their rat babies, but they're not great for agriculture. But here we are in one of the safest places and most tranquil places in the whole wide world, way down here in the southern hemisphere. So, à très bientôt, mesdames et messieurs. I'll try and stick my nose in and say hello to our friend Elizabeth as well. Please do support her. Life has been pretty tough for them down there. I am planning on a December trip to Peru, and there is that dodgy, shadowy creature who follows me around everywhere. Seems so odd to me. Anyway, au revoir, hasta luego, merci beaucoup. And you know what? I really need to learn to say thank you in Maori. I'm embarrassed by that. So, all right, everyone, peace and love from New Zealand. Watch on Saturday. I don't know what the plans are for Saturday, so I might be able to put up a tour there. And then Sunday, I'm just going to be in the air for 2 days. So Saturday would be Friday your time. All right, everyone, take care. My pleasure. It was fun to share this. Take care. Bye bye.